my name is Oliver Dodd. Thank you guys so much all for being here today. I am one of the co-founders of Nucleate and currently serve as the Chief Operating Officer. And it is my pleasure to have on the call and to introduce to you now Alip Shah from Fedsprout, who is their president and CEO. And Fedsprout is one of our most incredible partners that has worked with Nucleate through our activator program to help educate our community about how to win SBIR funding. As part of that partnership, they are offering a series of webinars, and I believe that there are actually more that will be added to the schedule very soon. So keep an eye out on the Nucleate global events calendar if you guys are thinking about preparing SBIRs for different agency. Alip and his team has done a great job creating webinar series and sort of content that's even specified to the different agencies that offer these solicitations. So without any further ado, Alip, please take it away and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Oliver. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our Part 2 webinar. The first webinar we had that covered the NSF SBIR STTR basics was last week. In this webinar, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into explaining how do you prepare a strong Phase I proposal. In case you did miss the first webinar, I think Oliver mentioned that the video recording will be available on the YouTube channel. So you can definitely access that. And for this one also, we're going to be sharing a lot of information. So it might be a good idea to look back at that video once this one is posted as well. So my name is Alip Shah. I'm the president and CEO at Fedsprout, where I manage a team of SBIR, STTR experts and other staff members. And I help entrepreneurs develop competitive proposals as well. I was a past PI on several SBIR projects in the field of sensor development and robotics. Katie Bradley, who helped prepare some of these slides, is a former NSF program director. Unfortunately, just like last time, she will not be able to join us on the call today. We do, however, have one of our NSF expert proposal writers who is on the call, Carolina. So as we get to the Q&A section of this presentation, if we she can definitely chime in on answering some of the questions. So Fedsprout is a nationwide consulting firm. We're providing government support services across the country when it comes to writing proposals, managing awards, and also with translational strategy services. And our mission as a company is to drive innovation in a meaningful way where it benefits society and our economy. So today we're going to go over a few things. We're going to do a little recap on what the NSF wants to fund. We'll talk about some of the traits of a competitive proposal and the timeline to prepare one. One thing to keep in mind is there is a possibility that there could be a significant reduction in funding to the NSF, and that could impact the application process wherein applications may get even more competitive. So it's really good to write a strong proposal. We're going to talk about key components of the Phase I proposal, some tips to write a strong project description. We'll go into a little bit basics for the budget, and then talk about some common mistakes and how to avoid them before we have a Q&A session. So what does the NSF really want? So this is, again, a little recap from our last webinar. When it comes to technical challenges, they're looking for you to be developing something that is challenging, whether it's novel biomaterials, advanced biofabrication techniques, smart drug delivery systems, bioelectronic interfaces. Something has to be challenging. The proprietary nature is also really important. What you're proposing should not have been reduced to practice so far by anyone. And the reason is because it's not that easy. Your solution needs to provide a strong competitive advantage in a way where competitors can't easily replicate what you're doing. The proof of concept is important. When you're developing an innovation, what the NSF wants to do is they want to fund the development of a proof of concept so that you can prove that your technology meets certain requirements or validates your idea of what you think it can accomplish. And then early stage innovation. So you should be at a point in your research and development where you do still need an intensive amount of technical research and development so that that's required to get to a full stage product or service. And the NSF funds high risk technologies that also may not pan out. So, there's definitely some amount of risk involved in what you're doing. So, what makes a project fundable? So, the first thing is the market opportunity. Reviewers are looking for a market size that is large enough. They're not interested in tiny niche markets. They want to see a significant market impact. So once you reduce your innovation to practice, it's expected that the result's going to be a product or service that is either disruptive to existing markets or can itself create new markets or market segments. They're looking for a product market fit. So are there potential customers or partners that are saying they want your solution? And is it really a market pull versus a push? And they're really looking for the market pull because they want to make sure that your product is going to be successful. And then customer insights. So, what have you learned from your customers as you started talking to them? And they want you to have an initial idea of this even before you submit your phase one proposal. So, for example, if let's say you're building a flexible electrochemical sensor for wound monitoring, you may realize through your customer insights that hospitals are just too slow to adopt that kind of technology, but instead, maybe veterinary surgeons may want to use it for horse wound care, or maybe there's a huge application in military field kits. So these insights that you get on different applications can be very helpful in convincing NSF reviewers that you've done a good job and you understand some of the applications. So what would not be a good fit for NSF SBIR STTR? So basic research, definitely the NSF wants to fund something that is at a certain stage where it can quickly be commercialized or translated to the market. So if, let's say, for example, here on the right side, top image, um, if you're studying how stem cells differentiate on various substrates and you don't have any application, all you're trying to do is publish papers or get some insight, that's not what the NSF wants to fund. They want to fund applied research. So let's say you're developing a bioengineered scaffold or growth substrate that enhances stem cell differentiation for tissue repair. And the application for tissue repair can be in regenerative medicine or cell therapy manufacturing, some clear commercial path. That's what the NSF is looking to fund. The NSF doesn't want to do incremental improvements. So, as an example, if you're trying to make a PCR test 10% faster, and to do that, you have to update a thermocycler component, that's not a good fit because you're just tweaking existing technology, and there's a limited amount of technical risk and market disruption. But if you're developing, let's say something like a nucleic acid amplification system, that is portable. It's for molecular diagnostics and can be done at room temperature without electricity, like electrical connection. And that's something that is a paradigm shift on how diagnostics can be done. And it basically solves problems like accessibility, cost, infrastructure barriers, and there's novel technologies involved. And so that's really what the NSF is looking for. They're something that is more groundbreaking. They don't want to fund anything with low commercial potential, and they don't want to fund analytical studies only. Again, commercialization is really important for the NSF. Okay, now we're going to talk about the proposal planning and timeline. So what makes a strong proposal? There are definitely a lot of things that go into making a strong proposal. So you're going to need a lot of time to get all of this together if you're just starting out. And so it's really important to plan this out in advance of writing a proposal. Firstly, you need a capable and committed team. You could have advisors if you want to fill in voids. You need a clear understanding of your market. What's the unmet need? What is it? Who is the target market? And you need to characterize that. You need to have at least an initial understanding of your regulatory strategy and have an idea how you're going to protect your intellectual property. You want to be able to have done enough investigation to understand your competitive advantage and how you differentiate yourself from competitors. You also want to have done some amount of customer discovery and validated your idea of a certain product or service. If you are resubmitting a proposal, and that's the nice thing about the NSF SBIR CTR program, is that you will get reviewer feedback and you can resubmit your proposal. In that case, a strong proposal will contain a summary of the revisions you made and how it addresses reviewer feedback. And lastly, you're also going to want to have some sort of proof of principle early validation in your proposal to demonstrate that there is a real technical potential for what you're proposing. Proposal submission process. So we went over this last time. The first step is to submit a project pitch. If you do receive an invitation to submit a full proposal, then you prepare and submit the proposal, which then goes through a review process, and then you get selected. If you get selected, you get notified, and then you would start the project. And this is a very simplified process. I'll go into more details towards the end of this presentation. So one of the recommendations is to start early with your registrations. And this is something that some companies do stumble into and have issues with. So if you haven't incorporated, the first thing to do is to incorporate your company before you submit a full proposal. And you're going to want to start these registrations at least 6 to 8 weeks before your full proposal submission. And the reason is because sometimes these things take time. And what can add a lot of time is what's called sam.gov. This is a system in which you register your company so that you can obtain a unique entity identifier. And this process can take a few weeks, could take a month. And if you don't have a UEI, you won't be able to submit your application. And also, the registration with sam.gov is required to do other registrations, which is there are two other registrations you need for the NSF application. One is a registration with the SBIR company registry, which is extremely quick. It shouldn't take more than 15-20 minutes. And then there's the NSF's research.gov. That's the site in which you'll submit your proposal. And that could take up to 48 hours for processing your registration. So just make sure you start early. I've worked with companies that waited to the last minute, and two things could happen. One, they were not able to submit their proposal because they didn't have their sam.gov registration done in time. And two, they were really stressing out towards the end. One of them got their registration completed like hours before the submission deadline. So you don't want to be in that situation. Okay, so we're going to now talk about the key components of the phase one proposal. And here's a list of the core components. There are other components as well, but we won't have time to go over all of that today. The project description is the most important part of the application, and most applicants require guidance on this section. We'll also be talking about the budget and budget justification and the equipment, other resources, as well as some of the other documents here later on. Before you write a proposal, make sure to check the solicitation. Every year, the solicitation changes. There's some new revisions typically, and you want to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of all of those, all of these components, and they may change also. So the first thing is the project description, which is typically a 10 to 15 page document. And this really is a chance for you to tell a story about your team, your company, your passions, your innovation. And there are 4 sections to this. The intellectual merit, which goes over your scientific and technical innovation and what you're trying to prove, which includes your technical objectives. The broader impact section, which talks about societal or economic benefit, which is 1 to 2 pages. Your company and team, which is 1 to 2 pages, and you're really trying to prove that you have the right team to carry out this work. And the commercialization potential is a very important section as well. You're really talking about how your innovation will become a viable product in the market. So we're going to talk about intellectual merit. What exactly is it? How is it defined? And it's defined by a few things. Firstly, it's the potential for your innovation to advance knowledge within science, engineering, or technology. It's a significant set of research objectives that are clear. The novelty of your technical approach and the soundness of that approach is also very key. Then it's using the appropriate methods and infrastructure. And lastly, the alignment of what you're doing with NSF's mission to support transformative high impact research. As part of the intellectual merit, you're going to want to talk about your technical feasibility and how you differentiate yourself from a technical standpoint from state of the art or standard of care today. And so what's important is to make sure that it's clear that your technology is innovative and at the same time risky. So that's what the technical challenge is about, is explaining properly what those technical challenges are and having clear milestones to mitigate them. Having some proof of experimental support or some prior work done definitely goes a long way in showing that you've started the path down the feasibility evaluation. Even a small n=3 pilot study or a bench type prototype can help you. And then looking at what's available today, how what you're doing is innovative and very distinct, and even comparing that using maybe a chart or table can help the reviewer understand, why what you're doing is very unique. So this is an important part of the intellectual merit section. So how do you start out your proposal? Typically, you want to start it out with the intellectual merit section. And you're going to start out with the first few paragraphs that just goes over a clear statement of what the problem is or what the background is. What are the current solutions available today that are trying to address this? And then quickly introduce what the solution is early on. After that, you can start talking about the principle behind the theory behind your solution. What's the preliminary data that you've collected so far, and what does it show? And then you can go into saying or stating your phase one technical objectives and your success criteria that you're anticipating. And lastly, your key technical risks. And after that, you can start talking about what's your research and development plan look like. The R&D plan will talk about the tasks that you're going to undertake that will help address these key technical risks and help you meet your technical objectives. And when you write this, make sure to print out or save a copy of the merit review criteria. That's in the solicitation, and that is what they're going to use to review your proposal. So keep that in mind. Take a look at that as you start drafting out the project description. So here's some example or sample technical objective and milestones. So it's really important to make sure it's clear. You want to use action verbs when you're writing a technical objective, which in this case, it's using the word demonstrate, which is a good verb. You can use verbs like establish, validate, prove. And what you want to avoid is using action verbs that describe process, like to study, to explore, or investigate. In your milestone that supports this objective needs to be quantitative. As you can see here, there's numbers, there's a clear means of ensuring that it's clear that you've met this technical objective. When you write technical objectives, you don't want to have too few. So one technical objective may seem unfocused or insufficient to demonstrate your technical feasibility. And if you have too many, like 4 or more, then it might actually dilute the clarity, or it shows that you're addressing a scope that's much larger and way beyond what could be accomplished in the budget and the 6 to 12-month timeline of this phase one project. Here's another sample technical objective and milestone. Again, here, use of a good action verb, validate, and again, a quantifiable milestone. And so we're going to just go over again, we kind of talked about the intellectual merit. We're going to talk more about what else should be included in the intellectual merit section. So firstly, you want to have an explanation of the scientific basis of your innovation and clearly talk about the technical risks and barriers. And it's really important to talk about risks. The reason being that the whole point of this project is to mitigate risks. And when you're proposing a plan for research and development, by being able to clearly explain your risks, you're convincing the NSF reviewers that you understand what can go wrong. And by conveying that, they will gain confidence that you have the ability to solve the problem. So you definitely want to talk about risks. You want to include a research and development plan with milestones and a summary schedule. And if you've never heard of a Gantt chart or never seen one, this is what it looks like. A lot of proposals will have something similar, and not only at the NSF, but across all agencies. SBIR, STTR proposals, strong ones will have something like this. So you want to show at a high level, if you have, let's say, 4 to 6 tasks that you're proposing, just show how it's laid out over the course of the project. So what else should be included in intellectual merit? Well, firstly, you want to connect your phase 1 milestones to long-term commercialization goals. And so you want to explain how each milestone is going to support your ability to have a viable product. Then you want to define your success with clear quantitative criteria, which we kind of talked about. And so if you can talk about performance benchmarks that will demonstrate your feasibility, and you can even reference papers that show what those benchmarks should be and why those benchmarks are relevant. Those are great things to have in your proposal. Summarize the market problem from a technical standpoint. In the intellectual merit section, you're really focusing more on the technical aspect, but just briefly talk about what the challenge is today and why your solution is important. And then when you describe your technical solution, what exactly you got to clearly define what is this solution and who's going to use it and what it's going to do. So the who, what, and how it's going to be used also. And then lastly, we kind of talked about, well, this is not lastly, there's one more slide on this one, but we talked about the technical risks and challenges. You definitely want to have that and have 1 to 3 key technical risks. Don't want to have too many more or too less. Okay, and then this is, I guess, the last slide on what else should be included in intellectual merit. So you want to highlight why your solution is innovative and potentially transformative, and that needs to be clear. And again, how is it different from other approaches and why it matters? Talk about where you are today in your development. And, when you show the preliminary data, that's going to explain what are some of the gaps and what else you need to do to be able to prove the feasibility of what you're proposing. So all of that is really important to convince the reviewer that you have work to do to get to a point where you can start building a product. And then explain how your phase 1 results will position you for phase 2. Reviewers want to understand that you have a long-term vision. You understand what you're going to do in a phase 2 project and how you're going to get to eventually a commercial product. And then specify where the work is going to be done and who's going to do it. So this section, even though there's a company and team section where you'll go into more details about the key personnel or senior personnel and the facilities. There's another section for that. You can still briefly state, for each task, who's going to work on those tasks and what facilities will be used or equipment, because that is going to make it clear to the reviewer that, they'll have a better idea of who's working on a specific task and whether they are the right people for that task. Okay, so after the intellectual merit section, typically you can have the company or team section. This is about 1 to 2 pages. And the team part of it is, and the company part of it, there's 2 different parts of this. So in the company part, what you're trying to do is you're trying to explain why your company is a good fit for this project. You want to talk about why your company was formed, what the background is, if you received any funding or past revenue, explain that, and talk about what your commercial focus is. Explain how the project fits into your company's long-term goals, and then explain the core competencies of your company and how they fit into this project. Then you go into the team and you start outlining how the team has the necessary expertise to support your phase one objectives. And you want to talk about briefly, mention the name of the key personnel or senior personnel, uh, talk about their background, their experience, and focus on those qualifications and the experience that are directly tied into the project. Also clearly define each person's role and what their responsibilities are going to be in this project. And then it's very important to also explain that the level of effort or state the level of effort, which could be in months, in number of months they may contribute in a year or during the project period. And you could even express it as a percentage of time as well. And then if you have any other advisors, consultants, partners you're going to be working with, you want to definitely explain that here. The goal here is you want to show that you have a well-rounded team that covers all the aspects of making this project successful now as well as in the future. And make sure that if you have a team member that has demonstrated prior success in taking a product or service to market, you want to clearly mention that here as well. So here's some essential team roles for a good proposal, a strong proposal. While you may or may not need regulatory or other experts, if you do need it, then you should definitely mention anyone who will be supporting you in this project. You need somebody who is managing the company and the administrative functions, somebody that is focused on fundraising to make sure that you can continue to do good work even after this project is over. Somebody who is in a technical role, somebody doing customer discovery, and somebody who is managing or figuring out how to protect intellectual property. And you don't have to have one person for each role. As long as you have a person that has experience in multiple areas, that should also be fine. And if you need, you can definitely you can also have consultants or advisors, and just make sure you mention the role of the consultants in the project. Okay, so we talked about the intellectual merit section, we talked about the company and team. The third section is broader impacts. And broader impact is a 1 to 2 pages section. And first, we'll just talk about what is broader impacts. What's the definition of that? So it's the potential to benefit society or contribute to societal outcomes. And it's the ability to address national or global challenges, whether it's health, environment, security, could even be supply chain related issues. How are you going to create US jobs and strengthen our innovation ecosystem? And then translating research into products that improve quality of life. So these are broader impacts, and they don't necessarily need to be accomplished in your phase one project, but it should be the end game here is that you should eventually be able to make these impacts, whether it's through research or whether it's through activities that are complementary to this project. In the broader impact section, there are 4 main things you're going to focus on. Firstly, what is the motivation for your company to take on this project? You want to clearly articulate how your technology is also going to provide social benefits. So, who is going to benefit? What are the benefits they're going to receive? How is your solution going to provide these benefits? And when will the benefits be received? So that's a really important part of the broader impact section. And then also, how are you going to measure and track these benefits. So, for example, if your technology can increase participation of students in STEM, or if you're helping upskill engineers for various scientific roles, engineering roles, if you're supporting community colleges or MSIs, in helping them with education and learning, or if you're developing a platform that's used for academic purposes, all of those things, all of those benefits can be quantified. And so what's important is to explain how you would measure and track that. And one of the really easy ones is job creation. It's sometimes easy to talk about that and figure out measurable or metrics for job creation. And the last part of the broader impact session has to do with unintended consequences. So these are things like safety risks that could be imposed by your innovation, such as automation failures or incorrect data interpretation. It could be environmental impacts, privacy or security impacts, or even workforce displacement, sometimes in cases of automation. And how are you going to address those unintended consequences? Okay, the next section, and this is the last section of your project description, it's the commercial potential. And this is actually a very important section, and it does happen that a lot of entrepreneurs that I speak with, they want to put in an NSF SBIR Phase I proposal, but they've never really understood or done any customer discovery. They've not understood the market, this market segmentation, what the customers are looking for. And we have to tell them that they're not ready for an NSF proposal. The NSF, they put about a third weightage into this section when they're reviewing these different sections. It's really important to take this section seriously. So what is commercial potential? So that what they're looking for is the ability to have a large and growing addressable market, a clear value proposition, and well-defined customers. Some evidence that there is a demand for what you're proposing, which you might have been able to gather through customer interviews or through the I-Corps program. They want to see or have some idea of how this business model is going to scale and what your pathway is to deriving revenues. And again, this could be very basic in your phase one proposal, but at least you want to touch on these things. Competitive differentiation and how are you going to protect your IP. They want to see a team with commercial readiness, which means that you've either have team members that have experience or you have access to advisors with the relevant experience. And lastly, if you are doing something that requires regulatory pathways, or even when it comes to manufacturing, you need to have at least a basic understanding and be able to describe that. So this is, the commercial potential, really, they're looking at all of these different things to understand how feasible it is. And so what should be in the section? So there's that we can discuss. And if you go to the I-Corps program, you may touch upon a lot of these things, but it does take time to get some of this information together. The first thing is, of course, what's the unmet need in the market, and what's the size of that market? If you have an idea of what your total available market is, what's the serviceable obtainable market? And so these are things that you're probably going to need to go through. Even the Activate program through Nucleate might help you with this part of your application. Who are your target customers? What are the pain points they have, and how does the solution address those pain points? Talk about your customer discovery efforts. What have you done so far to validate the market needs? Explaining your value proposition. What makes your solution better, faster, or cheaper than what's currently available? And then what's your competitive advantage? And for a competitive advantage, a lot of times it helps to list features or specifications that your competitors offer and how your technology, your innovation is going to be even better. The other things you want to mention here in your commercialization potential section is your IP protection strategy. What are you really going to be providing to the market? Is it a device, a service, a platform? And how are you going to reach your customers? Explain how the SBIR funding is going to help you advance your commercial readiness. And then we talked about regulatory or even safety standards and ethical considerations. You want to briefly talk about that to explain that you have an understanding of how you're going to bring this to market in a meaningful way where it's going to, you're reducing some of the risks. And lastly, if your company has received prior funding, whether it's been self-funded or through VC or seed funding, you could mention that too. Also, one other thing you're going to want to talk about here is how you see yourself funding your development work, even beyond a phase two. Are you going to what's going to be the source of funding? And that clearly indicates to the reviewers that you have an understanding that you need to keep the research and development and commercialization activities ongoing to get this product to market. Okay, so that's the end of the 4 sections within the project description. And one thing that's important is when you're thinking about who's reviewing your application, these are experts, but they may not necessarily have the best understanding of your innovation. And so you want to make sure you dumb it down, or at least be clear enough to explain to these reviewers your project description. You want to try to avoid a lot of jargon or acronyms if possible, and make sure that you can explain it to somebody who is not an expert in your field, but has a general understanding and good understanding of science and technology. Okay, so we talked about the project description. The next important section here is the budget and budget justification. And you're proposing to the NSF why you need the funds to do what your technical objectives and research plan are proposing. So what you can do is you can start developing a spreadsheet for your budget. And to do that, I would say if you were to log into research.gov, you'll see there's an online form to fill out the budget. And there's different categories there that includes personnel, fringe, travel, materials and supplies, as well as subcontractor costs or consultant costs. You can find those different categories. You can start developing this in an Excel spreadsheet so you can start planning out the budget. And then eventually you'll translate all that information into the online form. You also need a budget justification document, which is up to 5 pages maximum. But most budget justification documents I've seen we put together, 2 pages is almost sufficient. And that really just talks about, why what you're proposing is sufficient for this project. The funds you're asking for, why they're relevant, why they're sufficient. So it's important though that your budget and your budget justification aligns with your technical objectives, and it should be reasonable. All the expenses should be reasonable. You want to spend primarily on R&D activities and not on business development or other operations. And then just be very specific, and make sure the reviewers will understand what exactly you're proposing, what kind of materials and supplies, and how that's going to support your feasibility. What you can also include into the budget are 3 other things: technical and business assistance, or TABA. This is about $6,500 maximum you can include on commercialization activities. This is typically something that you ask a third party or a consultant or vendor to provide those services to you. There's also something called the Grantees Conference, which is an annual conference, and you can budget up to $2,000 per individual and a maximum of $4,000. This typically takes place in DC or Austin, Texas, and it's 2 to 3 days long. And then the other thing you can also propose is the National I-Corp training program. and you can ask for up to $25,000 for doing more market validation. So there's something called allowable and unallowable costs in your budget. You definitely want to make sure all your costs are allowable. And these are things that are very logical, things to support your research and development plan, salaries or fringe benefits for your team, which is 401k or holidays, PTO. That's fringe benefits. Any materials and supplies, paying consultants and subcontractors, or travel. A lot of times, phase one travel is not necessary. So, it's not very common always to have travel in your phase one project. And then indirect costs, which are your overheads. And then you can also ask for up to $10,000 for CPA services to help make sure that you're maintaining a financially compliant accounting system. Unallowable costs are things like marketing or sales, office rent. If you're proposing office rent as a direct cost versus an indirect cost, that's something you want to avoid. So you may want to do a little bit of background on read up on allowable and unallowable costs. To do that, there's something called there's definitely online guidelines, but you can also look at the 2 CFR Part 200, which is the Code of Federal Regulations that goes over some of these costs and what would be considered allowable and unallowable. Okay, one other section we're going to talk about is the facilities, equipment, and other resources. Now, there is no page limit to this section, but it's important to be concise and relevant and describe only the relevant facilities and equipment. You don't want to talk about hundreds of equipment that's available if it's not relevant to your project. And you want to emphasize how these resources are going to support the technical objectives and how they're also going to be available at the time of the award. So, for example, if you are going to have a rental agreement for a facility, or you plan to have an agreement with the university, you want to mention that here to indicate clearly that you will have access to those facilities at the time of the project. What you want to avoid in this section, you want to avoid dollar values, anything to talk about cost of equipment. That's not what you put here. That's in your budget. So you're going to talk about, lab, instruments, software, office space, anything that's going to help you with your project. Don't overstate or undersell your space and your equipment. And then if you're using external facilities, mention that, whether it's an incubator or university facilities. And there's something also called other resources. And what are other resources? They're really non-monetary resources that can support your R&D work, but are not charged to the grant. So for example, let's say you won a prize competition and you get free access to an incubator space for 6 months, and you're going to use that for this project, you could mention that. Or if you have, let's say, some access to, let's say, a supercomputer at a university and it's free access for you, then you can talk about that. So those are the things you want to discuss here, non-monetary resources that support your project. One important thing is that for STTRs, you want to differentiate the explanation of facilities and equipment and other resources for the company and those that are being used by your research institution partner. Okay, the senior and key personnel documents. So there's 4 things that have to be submitted here. So what are senior key personnel? These are individuals who contribute to the scientific development or execution of your project in a substantive and measurable way. So even if they don't get a salary, as if they're contributing sufficiently to your project, then you can categorize them as senior or key personnel. And you want to provide a biosketch, which is not necessarily a resume, but it is a different format that summarizes some of the key experiences and qualifications that your personnel have that are relevant to the project. The synergistic activities is a set of examples in a one-page document that explains broader contributions to science, education, innovation, or society. The current and pending support document explains some of the current as well as pending research and development projects that you might be committing yourself to. So the NSF understands whether you have sufficient time for this project and if there's any overlap in research and development activities with other projects. And then the collaborators and other affiliations, that's a document that explains certain things to the NSF about panelists or for the panelists or reviewers to explain to them different affiliations and collaborations you have that they need to consider to make sure there's no conflicts of interest when they review your proposal. Okay, we're getting towards the end. I'm just going to quickly mention a few things. Start early. We recommend starting out 8 weeks prior to your proposal submission timeframe or your deadline. There's some common mistakes that you want to avoid. We kind of went over a lot of these things, but make sure that your problem statements are clear. You have done a great job with defining your market. You have done some customer engagement. Make sure you have a clear technical innovation. Milestones or budgets are realistic. You have an idea how you're going to protect your IP. Make sure you focus on your commercialization plan, and make sure your team's expertise matches your research plan. And then just one thing I want to mention here really quick is that if your full proposal does get declined, you do have the option to resubmit your proposal. And when you do that, make sure that you address the reviewer's comments as well as an explanation of how you've overcome them in your resubmission. Once you submit your proposal, it's going to go through a panel review, and these are typically experts that are from academia, industry, even national labs or entrepreneurs. If required, they'll have an ad hoc review for a specialist that is not a part of the panel. When they finish that review, the program director will then review the assessments and make a decision whether to select or not select your proposal. They may also ask for more questions and clarifications. Based on those responses that you provide, they may then select your proposal for award, or they may not select it. They will be using 4 main categories of competitiveness. If you are highly competitive or competitive, you have some chances of getting funding. But this will all be provided to you in a summary feedback. And this is an example of feedback that you will get. There is a summary of the panel review, and they have a rating here that says whether the panel recommends this to be highly competitive or competitive or not competitive. And then lastly, you'll also have reviews from each panel member. Here are some references that you will have access to when we distribute these slides. And then let's just quickly get into Q&A. I know I went a little over time, so I apologize for that.
No worries. Well, this was supposed to be the in-depth session, so we definitely delivered on that. And I also want to acknowledge Carolina, who's on the call, I believe also from the Fedsprout team, has done an absolutely incredible job answering a lot of the questions that people have been asking individually. So maybe before we jump into sort of questions from the group, Carolina, if you're in a position to speak for a few minutes, maybe you could kind of just summarize for the people on the call what are some of the most commonly asked questions that people have been bringing up in the chat, and any sort of specific answers that you would like to give to those folks that would be helpful for everyone else on the call to know if they haven't been reading the chat the whole time.
Apologize for any background sounds. There's a washer being delivered downstairs. But yes, most of the people have been concerned about previous funding, what kind of small details that could maybe detract from getting the funds, like having or not having patents, having or not having previous funding by seed funds, having ongoing researches or projects funded by other agencies that have still not produced any results. What else seemed to be a common question? Also about where you can budget, where you can place those funds that are being provided by the NIH. A lot of them are very specific to the cases of the people asking the questions, but in general, keep in mind, as Alap has been mentioning, there are many different criteria that the NSF will take into account. It's not just the market, it's not just your experience, it's not something it's not going to be a one ingredient recipe. This is going to be a combination of your intellectual merits, of the commercial potential, broader impacts that your product has, and as well a very well put together team. So there is no blanket answer to all of the questions. I think we could go one by one if Alep wants to add to the questions in the discussion. I see also that a few new questions have come up that we can discuss.
Sure. Oliver, how do you
Brilliant.
want? Go ahead. Sorry, Oliver.
Oh no, I was going to say we can go ahead and answer these questions. I mean, I'm happy to flag them, or Alep, if you want to look at the chat and figure out which ones you feel like are most relevant, or Carolina, I'll defer to you guys, but I'm also happy to flag the ones as they come in.
Yeah, so I think I'm looking at one of the first comments after Carolina provided a response to one recent message. So the question here is, can we submit the same proposal twice, back to back, or with minor tweaks? So you can only have one proposal being reviewed in the system at a time. So if you want to resubmit a proposal, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is you would either need to have your proposal declined before you resubmit it. And if you do resubmit it after declination, then you will have to do a pitch again. However, if you can also inform the NSF you want to retract your proposal, you could make some updates then, and then you can resubmit it. So that is a possibility, but you can't have two proposals in the system at once. The next question is, what's the best way to demonstrate commercial potential if we're still pre-revenue? Strong LOIs, early pilot partners, or TAM, SAM estimates? So I would say all of the above. I mean, if whatever you're able to demonstrate, so the LOIs, you can talk about that in your commercial section. You can't submit the LOIs or letters of support, but definitely strong LOI letters are great. Early pilot partners, that's a very, very good thing to talk about. Yeah, and then TAM, SAM estimates. What you have here is a good list. Also, whatever we covered under that commercial section, just take a look at that and see if there's something you can provide there. Is a one-page elevator pitch needed in the application? No, that's not required anymore. That's the one of the older solicitations require that. I would suggest take a look at the newest solicitation and you'll see what the requirements are. It's basically what I've covered today captures the current solicitation.
Sorry, I did receive a solicitation and it says there that the invitation itself needs to be uploaded. Is that what that means? Is that the question?
Okay, I think your question has to do with your invitation saying, your email invitation from your project pitch saying that you need to upload the invitation.
Yes.
So all it means is that when you submit your proposal, you have to upload a PDF copy of your email from the program director stating that you've been invited to apply to put in a full proposal. That's all that means.
Meaning the pitch already happened.
Yes, once you submit a pitch, if you're invited to put in a full proposal, you will receive an email stating that you've been invited to submit your full proposal. That email, you need to have a PDF copy that you will submit along with your proposal? I hope I answered that question. Okay, let's just move on to the next one. Yeah, and again, if you have additional questions, feel free to schedule a call with us, or you could also email us. We have a link here in the chat and also in this presentation where you can book a free half-hour call with us. We can go over any additional questions you have. I think there's a few more here. I'm not sure if we're going to get through all of that since we have 1 minute left. But I think it's probably a good time to wrap up, Oliver.
Sounds good to me. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the call. Thank you to Alap and Carolina, the whole Fedsprout team for being so available and putting together this incredible information. Really looking forward to the next set of webinars, which will be announced soon. So keep you guys' eyes on the Luma calendar and also the YouTube, where I will upload shortly, probably next week, the recordings from the first session as well as this session today. So thank you all very much, and hope everyone is able to stay cool if you're experiencing extreme heat somewhere, wherever you are in the US, and have a wonderful summer.